I was 48 years old and I realized I was not doing anything that was purpose driven in that moment and I needed to do something different. And I had
Mhm.
turned to Dan, my husband, and I said, I want to start a business. And the joke in the family was, you're having a midlife crisis. Do you think you just want to buy a car? And I said, no, that's not very purpose driven.
Mhm.
Luckily enough, let's look at this and let's start a business.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Activating Curiosity. I am Ryan Ware, and today's bonus episode, we're going to kind of stay in the lane of purpose. I know we've had some previous conversations this month, really kind of gearing around knowing and understanding our own purpose in life, which is harder to do when we're younger. But before we dive into the episode, I hope you're enjoying these conversations and all other conversations we're having. And if you are, share this with your network, follow, rate the show. If you'll follow us on and subscribe on YouTube, that helps us as an independent podcast to make sure that we're breaking through to others who want to have their curiosity activated or have an opportunity to listen to these conversations. I also want to say if you have ideas and you have thoughts, go ahead and go onto the website activatingcuriosity.com. Sign up for the newsletter, but go ahead, leave us a quick voicemail on there, leave us a comment, leave us some notes. You can let us know if there's a conversation that you would like to see us have. Please feel free to reach out. So going back to where our conversation is going to head today, I have with me today is Rory Rubin. She is the CEO and co-founder of SI Container Builds, located in Chicago. And I've gotten to know Rory over the past few months through a connection of mine that we're building, Becoming Human Again events together, Audrey. And Rory and I had a couple different conversations and just was fascinated by her journey to this present point of where she started and kind of founded SI Container. And I think you'll be kind of fascinated too, as she's been around architecture and construction in her life, but how she looked at her purpose as she got, to my age, as we get into our second, third, fourth careers. But she just felt like there was something more, and there was something that interested her as it related to sustainability and bringing her background from social impact and social work to be able to deliver projects for her communities and for others and other communities around the country. And I hope you enjoy the conversation, because I think it takes humans like Rory who are willing to step past some of the judgment that may be there from family or friends, and wanting to start a business or wanting to jump into an industry that is a little unfamiliar and not something that they have been focused on in their careers. But at the same time, having the willingness and the patience and the foresight to say, I have the idea, but I need others to help me do this. Because the reality is that we need to solve some of these problems as it relates to affordability and housing, and providing systems and structures for those who may otherwise not have something available to them as they go through their life experiences. Because if we don't look at it in this way, if we hold on to our ideas and we don't share them because we're afraid that others are going to judge us, if we don't want to release those ideas, or we've already set a path out in our own mind of what, if we did this, this is what's going to happen, so therefore I'm not going to do it, or this problem is too big for me to solve. If we stay in that area, then we have some really big problems in the world that will just continue to spiral out of control. So this opportunity is really, again, about solving some really large issues, but taking them on in smaller chunks and providing yourself the psychological safety to achieve them. Rory Rubin, welcome to Activating Curiosity.
Hi, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation because I want listeners to understand you've had your unique kind of background and the work that you were doing and what has led you to the work you're doing today. So before we dive into this, you and I have gotten to chat a few times, and your story is so unique in the social work that you were doing and sort of the area where you were spending your time in your early career. And now that evolved into this new area of working within construction. So let's take a step back a little bit into the journey of how did you get started, going into the area of social work? What was driving you to get into that work for yourself and for your community and the places that you lived? And then as you went through that journey, like what were you noticing? Like what was it making you question about like how we approach construction or approach how we live in our society that made you peek kind of into this area that you're focused on today?
Yeah, I know it sounds really unique when I tell my story that I started off as a social worker and I have my master's in social work, but it really does tie together. My specialty area was Alzheimer's disease, and I worked for the National Alzheimer's Association. I worked for
Hmm.
their sister organization, the Alzheimer's Society in the UK. And I did a lot of things that were driven around purpose. And that's really kind of my theme in my life,
Hmm.
but I didn't realize it. When you're in your 20s, you don't really think, "Oh, what's my purpose?" My purpose in my 20s is very different than my purpose in my mid-50s now.
Right.
But ultimately, it was the stepping stone of realizing that I had to do things that were bigger than me. I had
Hmm.
to impact other people and other communities, something that's bigger than myself. And so the social work kind of thread through all of my work related history over the last, couple of decades.
Yeah. So you mentioned like early on that purpose piece. Was it like we're coming from the generation? I think we talked before. We're kind of the same generation X, and it's like you just get a job, right?
Yeah.
What is this purpose word? But as you got into it, it was like your purpose was, look, I want to help the communities in which I'm going to live or help individuals. Like, so you're going through all of these, years through your life. You're practicing giving back to your community. You mentioned you kind of went the nonprofit route in supporting the Alzheimer's organization, which is great. My father had dementia, and I think that work is like so important
More so.
to see like someone, not just for those going through it, but the families,
Yeah.
and understanding it. So how, as you're going through that, what were you noticing? Like, hey, back to this purpose. Like, I need to do something different
Yeah.
to kind of help address some of the challenges that we're seeing in society. Because if you're coming from that social work, I'm assuming that's a big thing. Question you're asking yourself is like, back to the purpose, what else could I be doing to help? Like, what questions were you asking, and what were you starting to investigate?
Yeah, in some ways I didn't really have a choice. So I'm an only child and I traveled and moved around a ton growing up. I lived in like 11 different places before I was 18, and there was a lot of that. And so I really had to know what it was like to integrate and to assess and
Hmm.
to understand different people and communities and really where do I fit in? And so that was always a thing that was on my mind. But the longer part of that story is both my parents are extremely, and my mom passed away actually from Alzheimer's
Hmm.
4 years ago, but both my parents were extremely involved in their communities. They both spent a lot of time in volunteer activities. They felt strongly that you're here on this planet to do something that is bigger, and that if you're not giving back, you're kind of failing. And so that
Yeah.
was really kind of ingrained in me, and I didn't have a choice in that thought perception from an early age is like you do something that impacts other people because that's your purpose. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of my story that I always had in the back of my head when I was young until where I am now.
Mhm. What were they doing? Like, what were they doing in their lives to give back in their communities that you were seeing early on and saying, maybe you wanted to mimic, or maybe you maybe it was just enough to say, "Okay, that was their passion. This is the direction I'm heading."
Yeah,
Like, were you seeing some of those or?
yeah, it's really special. My parents really did things like my mom sat on the Alzheimer's disease board of her community for a decade. And it
Mhm.
was ironic in some ways that she herself got Alzheimer's in the end.
Yeah.
And so I was watching her do volunteer, watching my dad sit on boards and doing a lot of volunteer early mornings, getting up and doing an activity in a nonprofit world. For them, it was really just a meaningful contribution. Making money and having a job is one thing. And I think it'd be wonderful when we all love our jobs and do our regular job and integrate that. But for them, it was, this is above and beyond your everyday. Like
Yeah.
you have to do this, whether and it's more than a financial thing. Like you can always write a check to an organization. It was a
Right.
time thing. It's like,
Mhm.
where can you spend your time that makes it useful for other people? And that's helping to build community. It really is. So
Mhm.
I didn't realize I was a big fan of that. Growing up, you're kind of dragged to a lot of stuff and
Yeah.
you don't always appreciate some of that, but looking back, it's meaningful. It really is meaningful. It kind of shaped who I am today.
Yeah. How are they finding time? Because as we move through our conversation, like you got into the construction industry, which we'll
Yeah.
get to, but you you see your parents doing this, and I can remember my parents, and it was always like, my dad was, didn't have a typical 9 to 5. He was working 4 to midnight or midnight to 8 a.m. He
A
worked
lot.
in manufacturing, right? So it was like a lot of different hours. But I did start to notice like all of the time that they spent, engaging in community work or with organizations and their religion or whatever they were spending time in.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know if you see this, but we're a very time poor industry now that
We
you're
are.
in it. And it's like, I'm trying to understand what that means.
Yeah.
When I hear we don't have time to do certain things, but this piece now that you're seeing it is like, hey, I'm watching my parents do this as a young kid. It may not feel like totally aligned with who I am or these things that they're
Yeah.
doing. Um, you go you go out, you get involved in your career through social impact. Take us to the point where you said, okay, it's time for something different that I can give back to the communities in which I'm living, that is kind of stepping out of the nonprofit and into what I'm interested to know too is this construction industry
Yeah.
that is like, we've all grown, a lot of us have grown up in it or around it or kind of came, just saw it when we were kids and wanted to get into it. Like, what made you start to notice some of those things you said you wanted to get involved in the industry?
Yeah, so in between the whole social work part of my life and the construction part of my life, there were decades of working in healthcare, working in sales, working in management consulting and leadership development and organizational development. And so there were
Mhm.
all of these pieces that I was like trying to learn, I guess, to put in my own personal toolbox. And then the story goes, and I share the story, and it's a big joke in my family, and it has been since day one. Is I was 48 years old, and I realized I was not doing anything that was purpose driven in that moment, and I needed to do something different. And I had
Mhm.
turned to Dan, my husband, and I said, I want to start a business. And the joke in the family was, you're having a midlife crisis. Do you think you just want to buy a car? And I said, no, that's not very purpose driven.
Mhm.
Ironically enough, let's look at this and let's start a business. And I started poking around in the sustainability of construction. My dad is
Mhm.
an architect by background, so I grew up in that environment and appreciating that environment. And I started to poke around and realize that the shipping container was something that other countries have been utilizing for decades really successfully. And
Mhm.
what a great sustainability moment because we don't ship them back typically. And so they're lying around in waste if we don't repurpose them, and they've
Mhm.
been legal since 2016 in the ICC codes. I'm like, all of these pieces started falling together. And you know,
Mhm.
it sounds like it would be a dream come true, but of course, starting a company is extremely difficult, and it's taken a long time to get to
Mhm.
where we're at now, and as we grow. And then how do I then take this sustainable product and really look at it in terms of how I'll blow it up, from a community standpoint. And that's
Mhm.
where affordable housing comes in, and that's where working for nonprofits and doing, buildings. We were just completing a girls' trafficked home here in the state of Illinois. They've never
Mhm.
had a safe place for girls who've been trafficked, under the age of 18. And, those are moments that are full circle moments. Now I've been able to piece together manufacturing, modular construction, the shipping container, and social work, and
Mhm.
it just kind of lends itself to the overall goal of the purpose that I want in my life.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, mentioning that your father was an architect and kind of going back to the point of we talked about the industry didn't have time for something. He saw that not only as an architect that he was doing something for society by designing buildings, right? That we could uh, live in or heal in or
You're
whatever
an
it was that we're
architect.
part of.
You know
Yeah, that's
this.
where my background is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's there is this societal piece to it, right? Like you're trained to deliver something bigger for
Yeah.
humanity, right? We should be doing more for humanity. So that it's interesting that, your mom's, spending her time focused on Alzheimer's and that impact that it has on society and families. Your father is designing buildings, but also finding ways to do other things with the community, building relationships. And it goes again, finding the time to do those. You're spending your career in areas, like you said, you're seeing organizational change. All of these things are stitching together into a career that you said, I'm interested in sustainability. I'm interested in bringing something back to humanity, society, our communities. As you mentioned, some of these early projects as you got into the container approach to construction. Um, is that, was that something that you first, when you're forming the company, you said, "Hey, it's got to be sort of the social impact for those communities." And how were you really thinking about sustainability from the containers and the way that you were thinking about delivering them to market or getting, again, goes back to the buy-in of the
Mhm.
piece, getting people to understand what it was that you were aiming to solve, that problem that you were aiming to solve by utilizing the containers. This episode of Activating Curiosity is brought to you by Overcast Innovations, architects, designers. Have you ever conducted a project walkthrough, looked up at the ceiling, and wondered, when did that decision get made? Not because it was necessarily wrong, but because it wasn't your original design. Most have experienced that moment. Somewhere between design, coordination, procurement, and installation, decisions get made that shape a space. The question is whether design could have been preserved if questions were asked and answered earlier in the process. Overcast Innovations is helping project teams rethink how building systems are coordinated by bringing key decisions forward and reducing complexity before work reaches the field. Because protecting design starts long before installation ever begins. Learn more at overcastinnovations.com.
Yeah, so, great ideas are great ideas. And then they turn into business plans, and business plans, kind of grow out of there, but I'm simplifying it. So this has been 7 years in the making. I started off by just falling in love with the shipping container and
hmm
realizing that from a sustainability standpoint that we could be doing some really cool things with this that other countries have been doing. And some people in this country are doing it, but we're just always slow to adopt. And
Yeah.
there's always that misconception, oh, rusty old box, or it's, it's going to
Right.
mold or leak or all of these things. And, I didn't realize what I was walking into. I just realized that I wanted to do this. And so sometimes I don't know, to my own, it's not demise because I'm still standing, but I sometimes jump into things and then it's the sink or swim mentality.
Hmm.
It's like, let's keep going on this. We're going to dig in. We're going to that grit, that grind, and we're going to make this work. And so, flash forward 4.5 years ago is when we got connected to High Park Angels, which were our lead seed investment group. And we were able to say, this is better than a great idea. This is something that can be scalable. This is something that
Hmm.
is meaningful. But the only way to do that is to do that offsite. And so we needed to get into a factory to do that. And so for the last 4.5 years, we've been finding our footing in the offsite modular construction industry, finding our footing there, but also finding our footing in making sure that there is still purpose around what we're doing and sustainability, and then the projects that we take and how we're supporting other people and entities and businesses. And so we've made some pivots and some,
Hmm.
shakeups and switches. And we're really a B2B focused company because if we're going to do this correctly, we can do this to help save people time and money. I'm preaching to the choir when I preach to you that says construction's not getting cheaper, it's
Right.
getting worse. And we're in a massive housing crisis in the United
Hmm.
States. I mean, these things are not going away. And if there's ways that I can help impact that in a positive way, then I am all in to continue that battle and that fight because we have to. We really do. And I believe we have a solution.
Yeah. Well, and it's so true that construction is not getting any cheaper, and it doesn't matter whether it's housing or whatever we're building. And there's a number of reasons why that's true, right? There isn't, one answer to that. And I
Right.
think that's what we look at as for humans. It's like, well, as you mentioned, the shipping containers, like we build the idea of what something is in our own head
Yep.
without doing any validation sometimes. It's just we're moving so fast, we don't have enough time. So, we see one image one time, we think we just multiply that across everything
Right.
and say, well, that's gotta be how it is, right? Well, we can't solve the housing crisis with a single answer, right? It can't just all
Correct.
be stick built, and what you're doing and what others are out there doing to get housing, construction costs down, like get the supply up. And there have been some regions that have been able to get supply up, seeing a little bit of the pressure kind of come down. But a number of things could be true in that as well. It could be
Yeah.
exodus of people leaving because costs were
Hmm.
high and their
Yeah.
population. So you got to take all of these things and have more curiosity to ask different questions. And you were starting to ask different questions like, what is it what is it about the container that people don't like and how
Right.
they think about it? So you mentioned kind of the B2B and the save time and save money, um and the way you're building the housing, but you're also doing some other vertical market and project
Yeah.
types. What what have you been noticing? This is where I get interested because your father was an architect,
Hmm.
but like coming into this world of like those sort of obstacles and barriers that you're hearing kind of put up, potentially towards not only the solution, right, but also the process in which to get there. Like,
Yes.
how do you design with this intent? How do you design with this methodology? Because I think your perspective could be interesting in what you've learned since had the midlife crisis and bypassed the car and went straight for the building industry.
That's what
Which,
everybody does, right?
right, I mean, why not? It's like,
Uh,
hey, it's that's a courageous leap.
well, thank you.
Most people would have taken the car. Um, but I like that. I like what you're doing, and I think this is worthwhile. It's so important, the projects that you've been working on. But back to the question, like what have you been seeing? Like how are you utilizing you've said organizational change, but like societal changes in the way you've approached your career, like how are you approaching those processes
Yeah.
and obstacles that you hear about?
It's kind of a social worker technique, it's all about collaboration and education. So, I did not realize when I started the company as a founder and a CEO that the majority of the time I spend is truly around engaging people to collaborate and to educate, not just about the shipping container, but ways in which we can work together to reduce
Hmm.
costs, project costs for large scale projects. We have solutions for that. And for people to understand that I'm not the only solution to your point. There are some great solutions out there, but I am a solution. And I scream from the top of the mountains of Chicago because, there's lots of mountains here. And
Right.
I scream and I say, "Listen, Chicago, I love you as a city. You're experiencing a tremendous amount of housing inequality here.
Hmm.
Why is it so difficult for us to bring product into the city of Chicago?" And there are multiple layers in that, and we don't need to get into that in the
Right.
podcast, but it's like partnering with Habitat for Humanity. It's partnering with developers who understand what we're trying to do. It's getting out there. Like tomorrow night, I'm going down to a South Side community, a South Side of Chicago community chamber, and we're going to sit and talk with small businesses and other community members and aldermanic support, and so that they can continue to hear the voice that there's something out there that we can be doing right now, and let's try to work together to get that solution. I just can't
Hmm.
do it on my own, and that's the thing that I've realized more than anything. I mean, that's the part of like with offsite dirt and Audrey's commitment in
Hmm.
collaborating and bringing people together, and so that to me is the basics of social work is true collaboration and education.
Hmm. Yeah, you're going into the communities, you're going to the humans, the humanity piece of this, and trying to understand how they came about their own thought process, right?
Yeah.
Thought processes around these solutions. Because I think a lot of what's happened, with the offsite world and prefabrication has been sort of a forced messaging that was a disconnect between the industry itself, right? The
Mhm.
design industry and the construction, but also, the communities. What you're talking about when you're doing housing, like before you can even start building, you're getting an entitlement. So you've got to go through a
Right.
process of educating that community of why these things are important. But even before that, what I'm hearing from you is like, hey, it's not just telling, it's a lot more asking, like going in and asking the community questions and getting them to engage. Therefore, it feels less forced. And
Yes.
it feels like now they're becoming this willing participant in the journey. So, like, is that, I'm intrigued by what you said about the, really it starts with that,
Yeah.
social side, right? The social piece, and the collaboration. Like, how a lot of people would probably not have the patience for that,
That's
to
probably
do it.
true. I never
Yeah.
realized I was a patient person until I look back at how long it's taken me to even get here. So, yes, it's patience.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're trying to help people. One, you're helping yourself understand what,
Yeah,
right, what they're thinking. If you are coming in and trying to force the solutions down, you're not, whether you want to rush, like we all want to rush, right? We need
yeah,
to get things off the ground. Investors want to see things get off the ground. But the reality is like, well, that's how a lot of people end up with failing businesses because they're rushing through this area that where you get to explore and get a lot more data or information, right? By
yeah.
asking those questions. So, you know, can you just talk a little bit more about your, even, you mentioned the group that you're going to go talk to tomorrow night. Like, as you're talking with architects or contractors or
Mhm,
developers, which is probably your target,
mhm.
where you mentioned Habitat for Humanity, like what is that process like, for you, to have that discussion? And how are they, what are you learning from them and what do you feel like they're learning from you based off your approach?
Yeah. So I would say, fundamentally, we're all human, right? And so as human beings, I look at it as really that basic is that there are key human things that we all need and deserve: food, water, shelter, air. Those
Hmm.
are the things. I'm a camper. So those are the things that you have to think. You got to put your shelter up. You got to make your fire. You got to get your water. And these are the key things that we are all human and we need and fundamentally deserve. So when I go into a conversation, I go into it as, what do we have in common? We might look a little different. We might practice a different religion. We might practice a different culture, like a different kind of food,
Hmm.
live in a different area. But at the end of the day, we still have the same fundamentals. And so for me, it's going into that community and really understanding what are some of the key components that are important to them, and then building from there. And they're not usually very different, but there's some telling points. These communities, and I think that's probably this is similar in all large cities, is that there are little communities within the city. In Chicago,
Right.
many of these community villages. And I would say that what I've learned most recently is the necessity of these generations to stay in their community and really building that generational feel where they
Hmm.
don't have to leave because they can't afford something or there's not housing for them. They want that intergenerational living. We're so dispersed in the US, and my family is dispersed, so I can
Right.
understand. At the end of the day, I think we really do all need each other, and to be able to build in that piece and to understand how I can help build in that piece, whether it's how I design a house or a community so that people can walk, people can, when they start to age, they age in place. When there's
Hmm.
other needs from a social service perspective, that they're there, they're accessible. Those are the pieces that now are always in my mind when I have these conversations with people.
Yeah. I know. I love that story, having been able to like travel, the world a little more, right? When you get out of your bubble, you kind of see other, the way other communities or societies or regions or parts of the world, right, are living. There is that not only community, there is family, right? I mean, like Italian families. I mean, go to small regions of Italy or Spain or wherever, and you see that connection,
Yeah.
that human piece of it. And I think what you're addressing is, look, we yes, you mentioned we're only one answer to this, but you're trying to get help, one, solve the problem for getting a supply up of housing to get an affordability, you know, where that needs to be
Right,
by region, right?
right.
Because of how every state is so different, every city is so different.
Mhm.
Um, but you're also trying to address other problems that we have.
Yeah.
You mentioned, the home for women that were trafficked,
Mhm.
right? Like that is that's heavy when you hear it. It's like,
Yes.
I know I was
Mhm.
talking to Noma, and I believe you two have spoken.
Yeah,
Like,
she's fantastic.
yeah, what she's doing, and it's like this. It's something that we realize is happening. We hear it and we talk about, but we don't actually know the impact.
Right.
But even when you solve one problem, there's this other systematic struggle and challenge
Sure.
that humans have. And housing is only one answer, one part
Mhm.
of that. So, but it is a way that we can get more stability, and not just, that group's lives, but so many others' lives, by being able to provide a solution, um, that can address those. And to
Yeah.
be honest, like going on your website, Rory, like going back to the statement you made, oh, it's just an old rusty box.
Until you
Like,
see what we really did, and it's not a rusty old box at all.
exactly, and that's where the designers can come in, right? It's like what you're trying to produce, and the answers that you give, like they're attractive, buildings, and they're ideas, right? You're putting out ideas, thought starters, and those buildings that you're doing are sort of like starting to set what's possible
Right.
with utilizing these sort of construction materials with a hybrid with other construction materials to address a lot of these problems that you're aiming to solve. So, talk a little bit more about then, like you're going to the human side. You're going towards them to understand designers in the community to get these solutions designed into the building. How are you? Because you coming new to this, like as
Yep.
you started to bring this, thinking about it off site, building a factory, and all your processes. Like, how are you evolving through your manufacturing? How are you, delivery to site, like all of those things without getting too technical? Like what's that journey been like for somebody who's like, oh, I did not come up through manufacturing. I did not
Yep.
come up through construction. What's that journey been like for you?
I
This episode of Activating Curiosity is brought to you by New Life Accounting. NLA is a construction specific firm that provides bookkeeping, controller, and advisory services to commercial contractors. So whether you are struggling to stay on top of that job costing, manage the cash flow, or make big picture investment decisions in your business, their team will help you find financial clarity. For our listeners, they're offering a free diagnostic service. That's a $500 value. This diagnostic takes a look at your current financials to help you identify areas for improvement. Plus, it's a perfect opportunity to get an expert's advice on those most pressing accounting questions. To get your diagnostic scheduled, start by booking an intro call through the link in the show notes and tell them Ryan sent you.
think the number one thing that I incorporate into my everyday is I really never have to be the smartest person in the room.
Hmm.
Typically not, and that's really okay with me because at the end of the day, if I can surround myself with the people that have the skill sets I do not have, then I'm going to complete my journey successfully. So
Hmm.
I say this all the time. People hear the North Star for me and Dan for the business is always what's in the best interest of the business. And what that looks like from a day to day and the decisions we make and the people we surround ourselves with are very important to developing a manufacturing environment. And no, I don't have a manufacturing background. Dan
Hmm.
has more of a business background than I do. But then the people that we have put into place, they are the people that have those expert ideas. And so when I went into this is if I'm going to be able to do some of the affordable housing, if I'm going to be able to tackle things like a girls group home for
Hmm.
trafficked girls, if I'm going to be able to do that, I also have to have a business case of being profitable, right? So at the end
Right.
of the day, I need to be able to develop a process, a system, a product line that is going to help people save time and money. And so we have a whole nother element of what we do, which is called P3, which is our portable power pods. And that is truly taking it to the construction site. So now I'm being able to say that I can save construction sites money by our bathroom pods, our workforce housing, and our job site offices. And they're a whole heck of a lot nicer than what people are used to being in. So people
Hmm.
enjoy coming to work a little bit better. And these are the people, the bigger people that are building these bigger projects. So I'm helping to support them in the same breath.
Right.
So there's different ways that I can insert SI container builds and be successful
Hmm.
and still have that purpose at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, I like how you framed it because it was one a lot of leaders can like go into it and it's like it's only going to work if I hold on to it and I do everything. And you've looked at this from a leadership level of I have an idea that yeah, it's getting questioned
Yep,
even by family when
yep,
I'm launching it, but if we're going to do it, you're able to release things and allow others to take ownership of it while still driving the mission, still driving the vision of the company and the purpose that you're living and why you want to be doing this. So I think wanted to kind of hear that piece of it because I think a lot of people think, oh well, they didn't come from this area, so I don't trust them or this or that. And
for
it's like
sure.
that's not how life has to work. Like we can go through life experiences and they're building, each step or step up as a foundation to the next level.
Right.
And I think that's what's unique about, you know, stitching your career together to get to SI, right? And create these designs for housing utilizing containers. You're not just you're building the manufacturing piece. You're thinking about this is really an area of focus, but oh, here's another problem I could
Mhm.
solve, right? I could address. So, thanks for sharing a little more on that, because I think that's an important piece of like your past getting to this present. So as we're pulling back and kind of looking out, then Rory, the things that you've been able to put in place since your bypassing the vehicle and going straight to
Yeah.
manufacturing, like what is it that you're thinking about for your business and for the industry, the work that you want to continue to do with SI container builds and the problems you're aiming to solving? Like, how are you thinking about sort of what's coming in the next 5, 10 years, and ways that you want to address, again, that purpose that you're aiming to always be tied to?
I think that that's something that's on my mind more than ever. We are at a crucial, pivotal moment in the company, and it's called teenage years as a startup because we're not a startup anymore. We have proof to market.
Hmm.
We won awards. People have seen what we're able to do and that we're capable of doing. We have relationships that will help us. But this pivotal moment that we're in is how do we now take it to the next level? How do we truly grow the company? What got us here is not going to get us there. And so
Hmm.
this is where we're looking at strategic partnerships. We're looking at relationships with other organizations that are maybe do similar things than we do or adjacent things to what we do and partnering together so that we can truly grow this business. It deserves the proper place to grow. I mean,
Hmm.
we spent a lot of time in the last 7 years getting it to where it is, and it's super exciting, and we're very proud of it. At the end of the day, if we really want to make impact and drive that purpose, we're going to need help to do it. And so
Hmm.
it's finding, once again, collaboration, a partnership, relationship. I mean, that's the core of who we are as humans, and realizing that there's probably other people that have done it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's find those people and work together to blow this up, which is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's when I think back through how most of us think, right? Like you guys have gone through, like you said, the infant years to the teen years, and when we start to think about like scaling that business, we generally always want to believe like, hey, we're the only one with this idea. Um, but you're at this point where you're saying like, look, I need, in order to scale, there are probably other humans out there who have thought similarly or have some other totally adjacent, might not even feel adjacent idea that
Mhm.
suddenly can connect in because they're listening, or they're listening, they're seeing you out there and they're as they're doing research, and it starts to like spark, this is where it sparks the curiosity of like what can be possible, because like you said, these are now in the building codes. Who would have thought that, right? I mean,
Well, and kudos to my colleague slash competitor. I'll even give him Stephen Shang from Falcon Structures. He was one of the instigators of being and the lobbyist to get
mhm,
that into the code. So the people that have come before me, the people that are here with me, really important humans. I don't. I wish I could say people are like, oh, this is so cool and unique. It's an idea that other people have had. I'm just trying to
yeah.
implement it and grow it.
Well, and I think that's important because creating enough safe space to test and to try, right? Like you're back to your patience of being able to, build those relationships and let people think about a strategy, or let people like bring things up, like getting, getting it into the codes. It's going to take a lot of us in the industry taking small steps to
Yeah.
keep getting things advanced to where we can solve big problems.
Mhm.
Like I say this a lot, but like we sometimes think like, I'm not going to touch it because it's too big of a problem. And why would I waste my time? But sometimes all it takes is like a person over here, if you get to connect with them, like they can go spend their time in that area because that's what their passion is. It's what
Yeah.
they believe their purpose is, and it's going to help launch all of these other things.
Yeah.
But if we're not, if we're afraid to say it, if we're afraid to bring something up, I'm not saying to you, but I just mean someone
Yeah.
who's out there and they're living their life, right? And they're in the middle of whatever it is. Like if they feel they have an idea, but they just don't know how to say it or know what to do with it.
Mm.
There are other people you can talk to.
And
That
more so than ever before, right? It's so much easier for us to connect
Mhm.
because of the internet. I mean, back in the day, we're the same age. I didn't have a computer in college. I didn't have
Right.
internet. I didn't have social media. I didn't have any of this. We had to like write letters and pick up the phone and, meet in
Yeah.
person. It's so much easier.
Oh my gosh, writing letters. Every project has them. The decisions nobody planned on making, a coordination issue surfaces, an RFI gets written, a field condition that changes the original approach. Most of the time, these aren't failures. They're simply the result of multiple systems and multiple trades trying to come together later in the process. That's one of the reasons this episode is sponsored by Overcast Innovations. Their team believes many of those coordination conversations should happen much earlier when project teams still have more flexibility, more options, and fewer constraints. By integrating building systems into a coordinated ceiling solution, they're helping reduce the complexity that often creates those last minute decisions in the first place. Learn more by visiting overcastinnovations.com. No, think back to the first time I touched the internet, it's like, oh, I'm going to send an email. It's an old story, so younger people can turn it off or play the Jurassic, play the Jurassic Park theme song for me. But I sent an email to a buddy of mine who was at college, and he sent me an email a month later, and I was like, we could have driven to see each other, or we could have sent a mail. And that's like, we didn't know how to use email. So
Right.
that's how far it's come.
Yeah.
Now you send an email and you're at somebody's desk before
Well, now we're
you know,
sending emails and we don't even have time to read them. And we're like, please don't send me an email.
right. Like, yes, now emails could just, be a conversation. We
Totally.
don't need them to be meetings or anything else. So anyway, I don't know where we're going with that, but
That's funny
it's
though.
funny because so much has changed, through our lives, right? I always say it, I'm 50. I've seen so many evolutions of things come and go, but like with each one, there's an idea that can spawn off. And like my career has changed so much. I've been able to do that because people were willing to test and to try. And I think with this industry, going back to what you're doing, Rory, is like there have been a lot of foundational things that have had to be put in place, but that took one person or multiple people with ideas in order to start to stack them up to where it provides the right time, like you said, for you to launch, SI container builds and other companies that are coming in, and other things will spawn off of this and more
100%.
ideas will come. So I just I think I'm kind of wanted curious into this area as well as you guys are thinking about it. Like, yes, the containers are there, but like, what other innovation has really made it even easier, or you think will become easier for you as this convergence happens? Like you said, like we talked about computers, but now we've got obviously AI. There's robotics. There's
Robotics.
all
Yeah.
kinds of different things that could help accelerate those solutions. Are there things that excite you, things that you're thinking about for the business, or hoping one day to implement them?
Yeah, I would say robotics has got to be something that will help my business in the long term. And then that's not to replace people, that's just
Right.
to make us more efficient. And I think that there is an element that, when we talk about shift work, people can work multiple shifts, but at the end of the day, they get tired, right? And so
Right.
robotics can do spray foam insulation and paint my container and do some of the pieces that I can do a lot faster maybe that way, and then I can have my team work on some different skill sets that
Hmm.
are better served with human beings. So I do think robotics is something that I would love at some point when we're properly capitalized
Right.
to implement. These are little things that we do think about, and I think as a whole, Dan and I are just not afraid.
Hmm.
So what comes our way, we'll take a peek at it, we'll see if it works, we'll implement it if we can. The piece that we both have is that grit to say that it might not work the first 25 times, but maybe that
Right.
26th time is when it's gonna work. You kinda gotta stick with things too. So
Hmm.
it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. God, that's a really old expression. Probably a really inappropriate expression
We've
now.
lost all the young people.
That's
Um,
terrible.
yeah.
But it's really realizing that it does take that patience and that time to
Right.
try things and poke at them and keep poking at them until they grow and they build or they become something totally different than what you thought they were gonna be. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think, as you're giving yourself, you're giving your space, right? This psychological safety for yourself, Dan, your team, that is this laboratory of testing
Yeah.
and knowing like, hey, we're not going to get it right the first time. So, but what did it tell us? What are we learning from
Mm.
those? And I do think, the robotics and a lot of the software and the technology that is coming out is helping manufacturing as we think about, the second industrialized revolution and kind of how we keep evolving. The next, we talk about the workforce all the time. Like the workforce is changing, the
Yeah.
size of it's changing, the what the next generations want to be doing to start their career or how they're shifting.
Mhm.
Millennials and everyone else are beginning to shift through their careers. Like there's huge opportunity, and I'm sure this would excite you know, a lot of those that are just starting to get into architecture, get into design, or get into construction, maybe even thinking about it in high school, like the trades look like in the future is going to be different. That doesn't mean that robotics are
Totally.
replacing them, but like
Right.
how they're doing work and how we're designing buildings and how we're thinking about you know, design and build sort of this one thing in manufacturing. So design for fabrication, right? Like I'm sure there's opportunity for those who wouldn't look at construction if it weren't for solutions like yours, right?
Right, well, and I think about it, so my son is in the 5-year architecture program at Kansas, KU. And I think things through with him about what does his career look like because he doesn't feel that and my dad didn't do a lot of this either. He went to the business side of architecture. He's probably
Hmm.
not going to sit behind a drafting table and use CAD and design. He's
Hmm.
going to take his architecture background. I mean, you've taken your architecture background and look at it in a different lens. And I think
Hmm.
that that's really cool that you have that ability to do that now where 20 years ago you went to architecture school to be an architect and that's what you did. Uh,
Right.
and so right now he's working as a with maintenance people up in Wisconsin, learning some basic skill sets that I think all architecture students should learn. But those are basics for him to start
Right.
guiding him in his creativity of what can I do now with this degree that might
Yeah.
look a little different to what people have done in the past.
Yeah. No, it's a great way to think about it because again, yeah, we think like it's our identity. And I
We do.
say this all the time. Like when I was younger, I always thought architecture was the foundation for where I wanted to go. And that's what I would tell people. Like everyone is like, I can't believe you walked away from architecture. I'm like, I didn't. I walked away from the
Yeah.
architecture office
Yeah.
in that setting. But I didn't walk away from my belief in what architecture means and
Mhm.
construction means and fabrication means, because I've worked in all of those areas
Yep.
in my career. And I never once thought like, oh, I just needed to be this. Like
Yeah.
that's the title. And love that your son is already seeing like these are foundational things.
They
They
are.
are not boxes that you have to force yourself to stay in. And it doesn't mean, I think a lot of times people would say, they get in their head like, I have to admit I failed if I walk away, or
It's
that
hard.
I'm feeling burnout. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, it is hard. It's a human thing,
right,
but doesn't mean you failed. Like,
right.
it's just literally the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, it's
You
it's
learned
it's an
something you
opportunity.
learned what you didn't like or learned what you didn't wanna keep doing, and to me, that's a gift, right? And when
Yeah,
people, leave a job after X period of time, I was just talking to a friend of mine's young son who just left New York, who was making a fortune, working in investment banking, and realized, "I'm burning out by working,
yeah,
16-hour days, 7 days a week. That is not my driver. Money's not my driver." Like, fine, but his what he learned is infallible. He's gonna be able to take that anywhere he goes. And
yeah,
that's really, I think it's because we're not so far away from the generation that stayed in the same job their whole lives,
yeah,
that we're starting to be able to say, "Wow, like, I can release that and do something
mhm,
totally different, and I can give myself permission to do it."
yeah. No, it that's so true and so needed for all of us to continue to hear is like, look, we don't what are we afraid of? Being judged by others or us judging ourselves harder over these things? Because the reality is like, yeah, I've changed jobs and it never meant that I didn't care about where I was and what I
Mhm.
learned. Those things were important. So I think that's why having these conversations about career changes and you taking, this leap into construction, you got a little bit in your background, the family's kind of been around it. It wasn't something that you were necessarily involved in, but you were like, "Hey, I see a problem, and then I'm going to find a way to live my purpose and find solutions to
Yeah.
to help people." So before we wrap up, I am sure there is something I didn't ask you, or maybe something that you just want to make sure that you're able to say. So I'm going to give you that time now. What didn't I ask you, or what would you like listeners to know?
Well, I think, we went down sort of the rabbit hole that I really like to be able to talk about, which is, not being afraid to do something that seems monumental or out of your depth, because there's always gonna be people around you that are gonna be able to help if you ask for
Hmm.
help, if you do the research. So, from me as a parent, I see both of my children as, the things that I would like to leave them is find something you love to do. Make sure that you have a purpose and that you're giving more of yourself to something else as well. And those are the 2 pieces. You'll live a very happy life if you can do those things.
Hmm.
And then find somebody that you can love, which I'm very fortunate that I did that too. So
Yeah.
these are wonderful, life lessons that until you can look back, you don't always realize you have them.
Yeah. No, I love it because having a lot of conversations recently, and I know you're kind of involved in. We just keep talking about it. Like we got to pause and remember that we're human. So these are good moments to continue to become human again. And as you just expressed, is like
Yeah.
finding those things that do make you happy because the extrinsic motivation of money isn't always it, even though we know we need it to to pay for the housing, to pay for the cars, to pay for the
Yeah.
things that we want. We're just natural survival, but they will not keep you, you know, feeling full, and they won't,
It's true.
your identity doesn't have to be the same as your purpose. So if you're tying your identity and you're being pulled in a different direction, it doesn't mean you're losing anything.
Yeah.
It just means that there is something more intrinsic that is leading you to better places for yourself and helping you become a whole person again.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciative of the conversation. So glad we got to have it.
I'm
Can't wait to
grateful for
continue and get to
you.
know
Yes.
you more. Rory, get to meet Dan. Someday I'll get up, maybe see the
You
factory. Would
need
love to do
okay, so
that.
you're in a place that we come to visit frequently, so I'm hoping to come see you, but of course, you have a welcome invitation to come to Chicago at any time.
Yeah, who doesn't love Chicago? Except in February. I will not
It's a little
visit
rough.
you in
Okay, fair
February.
enough.
Yeah. All right, Rory. Thanks for
Thank you
being on
so much,
Activating
Ryan.
Curiosity. All
Thank
right.
you so much. Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So that's the episode with Rory Rubin, CEO and co-founder of SI Container Builds out of Chicago. Enjoyable conversation for me. I know, again, similar to the last bonus episode. So I'm trying to bring a little different conversation where we're less focused on just some of the solutions that we may be bringing to the table, but focusing back to that human piece. Because in a world where we're in constant pressure, under constant pressure, or feeling constant pressure, or starting to feel the burnout of the day to day, we need a little bit of break once in a while to just kind of check in with ourselves. So these conversations are not just about us as guest and host, but they're also about all of you in the industry that have been thinking about things. And again, that's part of why we're having all of the conversations, are that we're all thinking about the problems that we really want to solve and how we can go about solving them when we feel like we do not have enough time, enough clarity, enough certainty to do anything about it. But again, as I always want all of you to be able to do, is ask yourself, how much time do I need to at least start to research? Because when we're asking different questions, we're allowing ourselves a little bit of space and grace to go do it. So until next time, I hope you do continue to look at those things, find the time, ask yourself deeper questions, go back through the knowns in your life and try to help yourself by giving yourself no judgment and free space and the time to do it. Until next time, continue to activate your curiosity as well as activating curiosity within others. The Activating Curiosity podcast is brought to you by Connective Consulting Group and Connective Coaching, part of the Curiosity Building Experiences. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss a conversation. Share the podcast with your network and help us bring more curiosity into the construction industry. Interested in becoming a guest or a sponsor? Visit us at activatingcuriosity.com for more details. Until next time, keep leading with curiosity. One of the themes that keeps showing up in conversations across the AEC industry is this: many of our biggest challenges don't start in the field. They start much earlier. The farther decisions travel through a project before teams coordinate around them, the harder they become to change. That's why Overcast Innovations is focused on bringing architects, engineers, contractors, and owners together earlier around integrated building solutions. Because when coordination improves earlier in the process, teams spend less time reacting and more time delivering on the original vision. Overcast Innovations believes stagnation is the enemy of innovation. And sometimes innovation starts by simply asking the right question sooner. Learn more at overcastinnovations.com.